This is her last project with us. We're letting her go. The words hit me like a physical blow. My hands froze on the presentation clicker as 30 pairs of eyes turned to stare. Bryce, my VP of only 4 months, had just announced my termination in the middle of my presentation to our biggest client. I stood paralyzed under the harsh lighting of Gavin Winter's private dining room. My career's execution, served between the entree and dessert courses. Please continue, Lynette. Bryce's smile never reached his eyes. Let's not waste Mr. Winter's time. Somehow, my body moved on autopilot. My voice remained steady as I explained how the new acquisition strategy had increased profit margins by 43%. The numbers were impeccable, the strategy flawless. 5 years of dedication to this account had just been rewarded with public humiliation. When I finished, applause filled the room. Awkward, pitying applause. Gavin Winter, worth billions yet wearing an off-the-rack suit, hadn't taken his eyes off me since Bryce's announcement. As waitstaff cleared dessert plates, he leaned toward me. Could I speak with you outside for a moment? In the soft evening air, away from the restaurant's hushed whispers, Gavin studied me carefully. That was supremely unprofessional and oddly timed, considering your strategy just saved my company millions. Thank you for acknowledging that, Mr. Winter. What actually happened in there? I explained how things had deteriorated after Bryce's promotion, how he'd asked me to adjust the quarterly projections for the board, how I'd refused. Numbers tell truth or lies, Mr. Winter, I said. I chose truth. He nodded slowly. I appreciate people who stand by their principles. How would you like to apply those principles more broadly? Gavin wasn't offering me a job. Instead, he explained he chaired the Trellis Foundation, which funded fellowships for industry-changing research. We provide resources for people to transform broken systems, he said. Your approach to accountability deserves wider application. A commotion behind us revealed Bryce rushing across the parking lot, his expensive shoes scraping against gravel. Everything all right, Mr. Winter? His voice strained for casualness. Perfectly fine, Gavin responded. I was offering Lynette our distinguished fellow position, the one whose publications become policy guidelines for corporate governance. The color drained from Bryce's face. Fellowship? What fellowship? The kind that examines systemic issues in business practices, Gavin said mildly. Her expertise on projection manipulation would be quite revealing. Before we continue further with my story, thank you for listening up to this point. If you're finding my journey interesting, please hit like so more people can hear what happens next. Leave a comment about a time someone tried to push you out, and subscribe to hear more corporate revenge stories like mine. My name is Lynette Mercer, and until tonight, I was the senior strategy director at a company I had helped grow from mid-tier to industry leader. I joined right after getting my MBA, choosing it over bigger offers because the CEO at the time had promised mentorship and growth opportunities. For 5 years, I delivered exceptional results. My team consistently exceeded targets. Our client retention rate was 96% when the industry average was 72%. The Winter Group account, Gavin's company, was my crowning achievement, a relationship I'd built from a small project into our largest revenue stream. What Bryce didn't realize when he publicly executed my career was that I'd documented everything, every late-night crafting strategies, every requested revision to make projections look more optimistic for stakeholders, every instance where he took credit for my work. The shift began when our beloved CEO, Nia, retired. The board brought in Carol from outside, a numbers-focused executive with little understanding of our culture. Carol promoted Bryce over more qualified candidates, including me. The whispers said it was because they played golf together. Within weeks, Bryce began undermining me. First came impossible deadlines, then critical meetings without invitations. Finally, my top team members reassigned, all typical moves from the how to push out a female executive playbook. I confronted him after he demanded I adjust projections for the board. The new client acquisition costs are what they are, I insisted. We can't promise growth figures we can't deliver. Bryce leaned back in his chair. You need to be a team player, Lynette. Carol wants growth. I promised him growth. Based on fabrication? Based on optimism. His tone hardened. If you can't get on board with the direction, perhaps you're not the right fit anymore. I should have seen tonight coming. Yet somehow, being professionally executed in front of 30 people still shocked me. Throughout dinner, I'd calculated how long my savings would last while maintaining perfect composure. 3 months, maybe 4. But Gavin Winter's offer changed everything. Standing in that parking lot, watching Bryce's confident smile disintegrate as he realized what was happening, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about saving my career anymore. This was about fixing a broken system. The Trellis Foundation Fellowship came with prestige, resources, and a platform. Fellows spent 18 months researching systemic issues, then published findings that shaped industry standards. The stipend was generous, more than my current salary, but the real value was influence. I'd need complete independence, I told Gavin. That's precisely what we offer, he replied. Freedom to examine whatever underlying issues you identify. Bryce interrupted, his voice tight. Mr. Winter, perhaps we should discuss your account needs for next quarter. Lynette's departure means we'll need to. Actually, Gavin cut him off. I'll be putting a hold on expanding services until I see how your leadership transition affects quality. 2 months later, I began my fellowship. My research topic: projection, ethics, and market accountability. I interviewed executives across industries, gathering evidence of how projection, manipulation, distorted markets, and damaged long-term business health. I didn't name my former company specifically. I didn't need to. The patterns were industry-wide, but when I published my preliminary findings, industry insiders recognized the examples. 3 board members from my old company called me privately. We had no idea how systematic this was, one admitted. Meanwhile, Bryce was struggling. Without my strategies, the Winter account faltered. Gavin had quietly withdrawn 60% of their business, citing methodology concerns. 6 months into my fellowship, I received an unexpected visitor at my new office. Carol, Bryce's champion and my former CEO, requested a meeting. You've created quite a stir, he said, settling uncomfortably in the visitor's chair. Research often does. Your paper on projection ethics has some board members asking difficult questions. I kept my expression neutral. Good questions lead to better governance. Carol leaned forward. Look, mistakes were made. We both know Bryce crossed lines. What would it take to bring you back? Name your price. The offer was everything I'd once wanted. Leadership position, compensation increase, board seat, but I'd glimpsed something bigger than my career at one company. I'm not interested in coming back, I said calmly. I'm interested in changing how the whole industry operates. His expression darkened. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise, I corrected. Transparency and accountability aren't optional anymore. After he left, I sat alone in my office, trembling. The old Lynette would have taken the offer. The new Lynette saw a different path forward. What Carol didn't understand was that I wasn't pursuing revenge against one man or one company. I was dismantling the system that enabled them. My fellowship report was approaching completion, and its recommendations would soon become part of regulatory frameworks. Companies would be required to implement new transparency measures in their projection practices. But the true test was still to come. I'd been invited to speak at the Industry Leadership Summit, the annual gathering where Bryce would inevitably be present, where I would finally come face to face with the man who thought he'd destroyed my career. What he didn't know was that I'd spent a year preparing for this moment, not just my presentation, but something that would change everything. 3 days before the summit, I received an anonymous message. Bryce knows you're speaking. He's planning something to discredit you. The game was entering its final phase, but after months of research, I had gathered my own arsenal, one that would make my public humiliation pale in comparison to what was coming. The Industry Leadership Summit was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a fitting location for what would unfold. As I entered the sprawling lobby, memories of similar events flooded back, times when I'd attended as Bryce's subordinate, standing in his shadow, while he claimed credit for my work. Today would be different. Today, I was a featured speaker. My presentation was scheduled for the 3rd day, giving me ample opportunity to observe. I watched Bryce work the room, shaking hands and slapping backs. His company's performance had declined steadily since my departure, but his networking skills remained impeccable. On the 2nd day, I attended a panel where Bryce was speaking. The moderator asked about ethical projection practices, the very topic of my research. We've always maintained the highest standards, Bryce declared, making direct eye contact with me in the audience. Some former employees might suggest otherwise for personal gain, but our record speaks for itself. Several attendees turned to look at me. I simply smiled and wrote in my notebook. After the panel, Gavin Winter approached me in the hallway. Subtle, wasn't he? Gavin remarked dryly. About as subtle as my termination announcement. Gavin's eyes twinkled. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Not nervous. Ready. Good. Because the committee added someone to your panel at the last minute. He hesitated. It's Carol. My heart rate accelerated. Both Bryce and Carol would be there, positioned to undermine me. The anonymous warning suddenly made more sense. Perfect, I said with more confidence than I felt. More visibility for what needs to be said. That evening, I received another message. Check your presentation file. It's been altered. Sure enough, when I reviewed my slides, key data points had been changed, numbers subtly modified to make my conclusions appear false. If I hadn't checked, I would have presented incorrect information, destroying my credibility. I restored the correct data and added additional security measures. Then I did something unexpected. I created a second presentation file and left it accessible on the conference system, a decoy. The next morning, I arrived early to prepare. The ballroom filled quickly. My session on transparency in corporate projections had generated significant interest after my fellowship publications. As I set up, Bryce entered with Carol. They took seats in the front row. Need any technical help? Bryce offered loudly. I know how these presentations can be troublesome. I've got it covered, I replied. But thank you for your concern. The moderator introduced the panel. When my name was announced, the applause was substantial. My research had resonated throughout the industry. Carol shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I connected my personal device rather than using the conference system, bypassing my sabotaged file. Good morning, I began. For the past 18 months, I've been researching how projection manipulation affects market integrity. Today, I'll share not just findings, but solutions. As I progressed through my presentation, I noticed Bryce's confused expression. He'd expected me to use the tampered file. His planned moment of triumph, when I would present incorrect data and he would call it out, wasn't materializing. During the Q&A session, Carol raised his hand. Miss Mercer, your research suggests widespread manipulation of projections. Isn't this merely a case of optimistic forecasting rather than deliberate deception? That's an excellent question, I replied. The distinction lies in intent and pattern. When adjustments consistently move in one direction despite contrary evidence, when those making the adjustments benefit directly from the deception, and when objections are silenced, that's not optimism. That's manipulation, the audience murmured. Many recognized the scenario from their own experiences. Bryce raised his hand next. Your research methodology seems flawed. You've cherry-picked examples that support your narrative while ignoring standard industry practices. I smiled. Actually, I've analyzed projections from 213 companies across 7 industries. The statistical correlations are quite clear. But I'm curious, which specific aspect of the methodology do you find problematic? He faltered, having expected to challenge my tampered data rather than my methods. The sample size seems inadequate. 213 companies is inadequate. The industry standard for similar studies is 45. I paused. But perhaps you're right that more data would be helpful. That's why I'm announcing today that the Trellis Foundation is launching an industry-wide transparency initiative. This was my surprise announcement. A program requiring participating companies to submit to projection audits in exchange for certification. Companies that passed would receive a transparency rating, visible to investors and clients. Market forces can drive ethical behavior when consumers and investors have information, I explained. This certification will provide that information. Bryce's face darkened as he realized the implications. In the current climate, companies would face pressure to participate. Refusing would raise red flags. After the presentation, attendees surrounded me with questions and congratulations. From the corner of my eye, I saw Bryce and Carol in intense conversation, repeatedly glancing my way. As the crowd thinned, Mira, my former team member, who'd been reassigned under Bryce, approached hesitantly. That was incredible, she whispered. Things have gotten worse since you left. The new projections are complete fantasy. Are you documenting the changes? I asked quietly. She nodded. Everything. But Bryce is watching us closely. Anyone connected to you is suspect. Be careful, I warned. This isn't over yet. Later that evening, I received an invitation to meet with the summit's executive committee. Walking into the meeting room, I found Gavin and 4 other industry leaders waiting. We'd like to discuss accelerating the timeline for your transparency initiative, the committee chair began. Recent events have increased urgency. Recent events? I asked. A whistleblower submitted materials this afternoon concerning projection manipulation at 3 major companies, Gavin explained, sliding a folder toward me. Including your former employer. Inside were printouts of internal communications, dozens of exchanges between Bryce and Carol explicitly discussing how to reshape projections and manage inconvenient data. The evidence was damning. Where did this come from? I asked, genuinely surprised. Anonymous submission, the chair replied, but thoroughly verified. As I reviewed the documents, I realized they contained information only a handful of people could access. Someone very high up had turned against Bryce and Carol. The committee explained they wanted to announce the transparency initiative immediately, with implementation beginning next quarter rather than next year. We need to get ahead of this, one member insisted. If these practices are exposed without a solution in place, investor confidence will plummet. I agreed to the accelerated timeline, knowing it would catch Bryce completely unprepared. As the meeting concluded, Gavin held me back. There's something else you should know, he said quietly. The board of your former company is meeting tomorrow morning. Emergency session. My pulse quickened. Because of the whistleblower materials, among other things, their largest client just announced they're reviewing all service contracts. Their largest client after Winter Group was Jensen Industries, whose CEO sat on the summit's executive committee. The pieces were falling into place faster than I'd anticipated, but I wasn't celebrating yet. Bryce was cornered, and cornered adversaries make desperate moves. When I returned to my hotel room, the door was slightly ajar. I paused, then carefully pushed it open to find the room had been searched. Subtle but thorough. My laptop was in exactly the same position I'd left it, but slightly askew. The zipper on my suitcase was closed to a different point. My phone buzzed with a message. Watch your back. This isn't just about projections anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart racing. The stakes had just escalated dramatically. Whatever Bryce was planning went beyond professional sabotage. For the first time, I wondered if my pursuit of systemic change had put me in physical danger. Then my phone rang, an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Miss Mercer? A familiar voice said. This is Patricia Voss, chairperson of your former company's board. I believe we need to talk. I met Patricia Voss in the hotel's private lounge at 10 p.m. The space was empty except for us, the soft lighting creating islands of illumination in the darkness. Patricia was in her 60s, with sharp eyes that had witnessed decades of corporate maneuvering. I prefer direct conversations. She began without preamble. The materials submitted to the summit's committee were also sent to our board. We've spent all day verifying them. And I kept my expression neutral. They're authentic. She sipped her water. What's less clear is your involvement. I didn't provide those documents, I said truthfully, but I'm not surprised they exist. Patricia studied me. 3 board members want to clean house immediately. 2 are worried about market perception if we dismiss top executives without preparation. 1 is still loyal to Carol. And you? I'm a pragmatist, she replied. The situation is untenable, but transitions require planning. I considered her carefully. Patricia hadn't risen to board chairperson without political savvy. This wasn't just information sharing, it was negotiation. What are you proposing? Help us manage this transition. Join a special oversight committee for 3 months. Once new leadership is established, you'd return to your foundation work with our full cooperation in your transparency initiative. The offer was unexpected. I'd never planned on returning, even temporarily. Why me? Because despite everything, you still care about the company. Because you understand the operations better than anyone on the board. And because this gives you something you want without destruction. Patricia watched me process her offer. Whatever happens with Bryce and Carol, the company employs thousands of people who had nothing to do with their choices. She was right. My former teammates, people like Mira, would suffer if the company imploded. Revenge against Bryce shouldn't punish innocent bystanders. I'll consider it, I said finally. But I need assurances about the board's commitment to actual change. Patricia nodded. There will be a formal vote tomorrow morning. I expect a clean sweep of current leadership by afternoon. As she stood to leave, she hesitated. Be careful tonight, Lynette. Cornered people make desperate choices. I returned to my room with heightened awareness, arranging chairs against doors and sleeping fitfully. Morning brought news rippling through the summit. Patricia had called an emergency press conference for 2 p.m. At breakfast, Gavin joined me. "Sleep well?" he asked, noting the shadows under my eyes. "Well enough. Have you heard what Patricia is planning?" "Only rumors." But Carol and Bryce seem agitated. He nodded toward the buffet line, where both men stood in tense conversation. As I prepared for the day's sessions, I received another anonymous message. "Meeting. Storage room behind ballroom C, 12:30. Critical information." I hesitated, suspicious of the timing. The press conference was at 2 p.m. This could be legitimate or a trap. I decided to take precautions. I forwarded the message to Gavin with a note. "If you don't hear from me by 12:45, check here." At 12:25, I approached the storage room cautiously. The service corridor was deserted. Most attendees were at lunch. I pressed my ear against the door but heard nothing. When I carefully pushed it open, I found not an ambush, but Mira, looking terrified. "Thank goodness," she exhaled. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "You sent the messages?" She nodded. "From burner accounts. Bryce monitors our communications." "What's happening?" "They're destroying everything." Her voice trembled. "After your presentation, Bryce and Carol ordered IT to purge servers. They're claiming system maintenance, but they're erasing projection history." This explained their agitation. They were eliminating evidence before the board meeting. "That won't save them," I assured her. "The whistleblower materials are already with the board." "But there's more," she insisted. "When I was reassigned, I learned they've been doing this for years. Carol built a client billing algorithm that automatically inflates hours by 15%. The system is designed to leave no trace in audits." This was far beyond projection manipulation. It was systematic fraud. "Can you prove it?" She handed me a thumb drive. Original code and implementation dates, plus transfer records showing developer payoffs for silence. As I took the drive, the door swung open. Bryce stood there, face twisted with rage. "I knew you'd be behind this." He snarled at me, then turned to Mira. "You're finished. Both of you." Mira stepped backward. "The board already has everything." "The board follows Carol," Bryce countered. "Always has, always will. Your evidence will disappear, just like you did." Before I could process what that meant, he lunged forward. I sidestepped, but Mira wasn't quick enough. He grabbed her arm, twisting until she cried out. "Let her go," I demanded, looking for anything to use as defense. "Or what?" he sneered. "You'll tell the board? The same board that let me fire you? The same board that—" The door crashed open again. Gavin Winter stood there with 2 security officers. "I believe that's enough, Mr. Harmon." Gavin's voice was ice. "Release her. Now." Bryce maintained his grip for one defiant moment before security advanced. He shoved Mira away and straightened his jacket. "This isn't what it looks like," he attempted. "These former employees were stealing proprietary information." "Curious," Gavin replied, "since we have the last 3 minutes recorded." He held up his phone, the screen showing video of Bryce's threats. The 12:45 check-in I'd arranged with Gavin had prompted him to investigate when I didn't respond. Within minutes, Summit Security had escorted Bryce from the premises. Mira was being treated for bruises by medical staff. And I was sitting with Gavin, Patricia, and the Summit's executive committee, explaining what we'd discovered. "This changes everything," Patricia said after examining the contents of Mira's drive. "Projection manipulation was concerning. Systematic client fraud is criminal." At 2 p.m., Patricia's press conference began. I stood in the back, watching as she announced the immediate termination of Bryce and Carol, pending criminal investigation. And then she said something unexpected. "The board has unanimously appointed Lynette Mercer as interim chief operations officer to lead our reform efforts. Her expertise in ethical business practices and intimate knowledge of our operations make her uniquely qualified to guide us through this transition." Cameras turned, searching for me. Gavin nudged me forward. "This wasn't our agreement," I whispered to Patricia as I approached the podium. "Plans evolve," she murmured. The board vote was unanimous. As I faced the press, the full circle of events struck me. 18 months ago, I had been publicly humiliated and dismissed. Now I stood as the appointed savior of the very company that had discarded me. I addressed the reporters with measured confidence, outlining immediate transparency measures and investigation protocols. As questions flew, I noticed Carol slip into the back of the room, his face ashen as he witnessed his empire crumbling. After the press conference, he approached me, his former arrogance replaced with desperation. "You planned this all along," he accused quietly. "From the moment Bryce announced your termination, somehow you arranged everything. Winter's offer, the fellowship, the transparency initiative. You set us up." I looked at him calmly. "No, Carol, you set yourselves up. I just refused to play along. You expect me to believe this wasn't calculated revenge? What would revenge have accomplished?" I asked. "Destroying the company would hurt thousands of innocent employees, making myself unemployable in the process. That's not strategy. That's self-destruction." I stepped closer. "My revenge wasn't destroying you. It was building something better despite you, creating systems where people like you can't succeed using your methods." As he was led away by board representatives, I finally felt the weight lift. My vindication wasn't in his downfall. It was in the transformation his actions had inadvertently sparked. Later that evening, as I packed to return for my new interim position, Gavin visited my room. "Congratulations, COO Mercer," he smiled. "Though I admit I'll miss having you at the foundation." "It's temporary," I reminded him. 3 months to stabilize things. "Perhaps," he said thoughtfully. "Or perhaps it's exactly where you need to be to create lasting change." "You knew this might happen," I realized. "From the beginning, the fellowship, the research, the transparency initiative, you were positioning me for this." Gavin shrugged. "I recognized potential in you and in the situation." When Bryce announced your termination at dinner, his arrogance revealed vulnerability. "So, all this time you've been doing exactly what you believed in," he interrupted. "Building systems of accountability, creating transparency frameworks, developing leadership skills. Whether that led back to your former company or somewhere entirely new was secondary." I considered his words carefully. "The whistleblower materials. Did you arrange those too?" "I merely created conditions where truth could emerge safely. People with conscience will speak when they believe it matters." That night, as I prepared for my return, I reflected on the true nature of my revenge. It hadn't been quick or destructive. It hadn't even been aimed directly at Bryce or Carol. My revenge was patience, building credibility while they undermined themselves, creating systems that made their behavior impossible rather than just punishing it individually, transforming humiliation into expertise that others recognized as valuable. Most importantly, my revenge wasn't finishing them. It was finishing what they tried to stop me from achieving. 3 years later, as permanent CEO of the now thriving company, I sometimes think about that dinner where Bryce announced my termination, how what he intended as an ending became the beginning of something far more significant. If you've stayed with me through this journey, thank you for listening. There's power in sharing stories like mine. They remind us that success isn't about destroying those who hurt us, but about building something better than they ever imagined possible. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming workplace challenges through strategy rather than destruction. And leave a comment about how you've transformed obstacles into opportunities in your own career. Sometimes our greatest setbacks truly do become our greatest opportunities when we have the courage to see beyond revenge to reinvention